Absolutely delighted to see you. We really are. We're Dave and Steve from the Happy Pear.
Sorry for any delay there. We were just making sure we'd everything ready before we started. But the goal of this workshop is to inspire you to bake your own sourdough. Sourdough is a dear passion of mine, and I think it's a total act of rebellion in our modern day global. Oh, well, sorry, we're getting a little. Yeah. So in our modern day globalized food system, the act of baking your own sourdough, you know, if I go to most supermarkets, typically bread could have 10, 15, even 20 ingredients in it. Whereas if you bake your own sourdough, it's 3 ingredients. It's a process that dates back.
What 3 ingredients are there?
Flour, water, salt. It goes back thousands of years and it's beautiful. It's a dance, it's an art form, it's elegant, it's romantic, and it's incredibly delicious.
So we're Dave and Steve from the Happy Pear, and we're absolutely honoured to have you. We've been Keemho bakers for years, and we've had our own organic sourdough bakeries for the last number of years. Tonight, Masterclass is all about empowering you about sourdough. We're going to answer as many questions as we can. But like sourdough it is a beautiful, incredible art.
It's complex because you're working with naturally formed yeast in the air and on the flour, and you're working with 2 secret ingredients, which we're going to talk about shortly.
Woo!
Yeah. Woo! This is exciting. We're really honoured to have you, and it's great to see so many people from all over the world here in Ireland in our little studio. Right, so first step, basics of sourdough. As I said, there's 3 basic ingredients: flour, water, salt. And one of the fundamental things of sourdough is your mother. So your sourdough mother, this is in essence what we've done, just to show you one here that I've prepared earlier. So this is your mother. This mother is naturally going to rise our bread. You can see the little bubbles in it. This is the culture that's going to help. You know, there's a fancy word for leaven our bread, to rise our bread, to create these lovely little air pockets. And a mother is very easy to make. Mother, you might use your sourdough culture, your mother culture, and levain is another term that encompasses the same thing. So
lots of echo, someone's saying. Is the echo all right? Is the sound okay? Sorry, we do have our mics on. Audio is fine. Okay, video as well. Okay, great. Okay,
so
brilliant. Yeah.
Okay, so to make your own sourdough mother, it's a very easy process. But what you do need is you need time.
So what's the difference between sourdough versus typical bread? Like, you know, if I go to the supermarket, there's loads of sliced pans. What is the benefit of sourdough bread?
So around the mid-1900s, guy Louis Pasteur developed commercial yeast. And commercial yeast, prior to that, sourdough is you're working with the natural wild yeast in the air and on the flour, and you're kind of working at the pace of the yeast culture when it's ready. Whereas commercial yeast gave you a much more dependable, much more scalable, much more controllable process that lent itself to industrial production. Whereas sourdough is...
But it's much less healthy, it's not good for your gut, and it uses refined flours.
Typically, I don't want to put universal statements, but the beautiful thing about sourdough is that you're using flour, water, salt, and it's an organic process. And what happens through that sourdough process is the sourdough culture almost pre-digests and pre-ferments the dough. So it typically can be easier to digest, can increase the nutritional composition of the bread, and it's just tastier.
Okay, question for you, Steve. So fermented foods are super, super important. Yes. They're very beneficial for our gut, where most of our immune systems is. Is sourdough bread fermented?
It is a fermented food. We're going to bake it, so typically a lot of the yeast are going to die in essence, but it's the product of fermentation, like wine, like chocolate.
Okay, so beneficial for, so it's almost like pre-digested.
Yeah, it does. So pre-digested, it also aerates, and it also, through that process of fermentation, it creates more beneficial
And
microbes.
Keep popping in your questions. I'll do my best. I've got my laptop here. Hi from Germany. It's all good. Brilliant. Okay, great.
Okay, sourdough mother, first of all, how to make it.
We are twins, by the way. Yes, identical twins, hence the name, the Happy Pear. We did start a vegetable shop over 20 years ago, and we've been professional chefs for more than 20 years and bakers.
Yeah, sourdough bakers.
So yeah, tonight, as we said, it's all about sourdough bread. And really, we're going to start with a starter and a levain, just to explain the difference with that, because it all starts with your mother, your ma.
That all sounds weird.
Ireland. But
it is, and your mother refers to your mother culture. You never want to eat your mother, which sounds bizarre, but this is your perennial mother, which you will always keep a portion of it and feed it, so it lives in perpetuity.
So do I buy a mother, or what do I do?
No, we're going to show you. You can either go down to your local sourdough bakery, such as ours, and go, would you have a little bit of mother culture? And that most bakeries will gladly give it. You could have a friend that is an avid baker. They might give you a bit of their sourdough culture, or it's very easy to make your own. So to make your own, take a clean glass jar. Ideally, it's sterilized, and we're going to go with equal part flour, equal part water. In terms of flour, choose a flour that's easily and readily available. A white flour typically has the sugars more available, so it will ferment quicker. A wholemeal flour typically will be more thirsty, so you end up with a thicker mother, and typically it will end up just fermenting slightly slower because the bran will slow down.
Okay, just to recap. Okay, so sourdough mother is where sourdough bread is all at. That's where the core is at. I can make it. Like I can make it at home by literally putting equal parts flour.
So we're going to go 50 grams of just a strong white flour.
Okay,
so just try to use a flour that's readily available.
Is this an organic flour?
This is an organic flour. Like I think if you can afford it, there's no perfect in terms of food. It's about doing your best. And if you can afford organic, you're supporting better farming practice, which means we'll have a healthier nature and ultimately.
Can you turn the volume up a little bit more, Shawnee? Someone's saying.
Yeah, okay, he's on
there
it.
we go. He's on it.
How old that comment is.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, so we've got 50 grams of flour and I'm going to go with 50 grams of water. Use whatever water you have. If you want to use distilled water, possibly better. If you can use well water or aquifer water, even better. But you know what? Tap water works just fine too. It's all about, like, sourdough is very democratic. It's easy. Anyone can do it.
And you always talk about it as an act of rebellion, like learning to bake your own bread. It costs you pennies. It is one of the most rewarding things that you can bake in the kitchen. And like that smell, that aroma in your kitchen, your family will love you, your friends will love you, and you will love yourself. That is the gift of sourdough bread.
Yeah.
That's the promise of sourdough bread.
So literally, I mix my flour and water and I leave it. So
That's it.
So there are lots of different ways in terms of my process. Oh, great. The questions are coming up now, which is great. So you're going to leave that for 3 to 4 days. As I said, there are 2 secret ingredients with fermentation. So if you think about it, humans were mostly microbes in terms of our makeup. And when it's warmer, such as 25 degrees Celsius, we want to spend more time outside. We're more active. It's easy to be more alive. Versus when it's 5 degrees Celsius, it's cooler. We want to be more inside.
There's less vibrancy.
Less vibrancy. And it's the same with sourdough. You know, the optimum temperature for fermentation is between 20 degrees Celsius and 25 degrees Celsius. That's where most activity starts. So if this is 5 degrees, if this is in winter in Ireland and your house isn't very well insulated and it's a cold house, it's going to ferment a lot slower. Whereas if this is in, let's say, the Philippines, where it's 30 degrees Celsius all year round, it's going to be a lot more alive and vibrant.
So this will really, like, so I literally I mix my flour and water equal part, like 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. I leave it sit for 5 days, is that it?
3 to 4 days. Just cover with a tea towel. So I'll literally take a tea towel, I will cover it. That's just to stop insects going in. You know, I'll leave it like that. I'll leave it for 3 to 4 days approximately. I come back 3 to 4 days later and I smell it. It starts smelling a bit yeasty. It smells a little bit gone off. It's probably separated a little bit, and you'll probably think, I should throw that out. Once you've reached that point, it's ready to go. It's time to start feeding it.
So when you think it's likely to throw it, that's when it's probably good to go.
Exactly. So what you're going to do when it does smell bad, mix it together, and now it's time to start feeding your mother culture. So what you're going to do when you go to feed your sourdough mother is you'll take half it out, and that's discarded. That is waste. So take half it out. I'm going to pop that, you know, in my compost, you know, because I want it to break down. And this is the process of baking my mother, or making my mother. This isn't feeding it. This is feeding it, but through that making process. It takes about 10 days for my mother culture to be stable, have all the right bacteria, so it's ready to bake bread.
Okay, so I literally discard half.
So I discard half it into the compost.
So this is almost like strengthening my...
I'm building the cultures. I'm going to add an equal flour, water, feed it up, and repeat that for 10 days.
Open lid or close lid?
I like to leave it open and just to cover it with a tea towel. If you close it, if it's highly active and you open it, it's going to burp.
Can you use the bit you bin to make a second bread?
You can once your sourdough mother culture is established. So after 10 days, absolutely. But prior to the first 10 days, you just want to try to cultivate as much of these resilient bacteria and get a variety of microbes.
That's a nice one. Smells yeasty, give it a feasty. You know, that's a good one. So it
like
smells.
that.
There's
Very
a good one.
So
that one.
In time, after about 10 days, you'll end up with a sourdough mother a little like this.
Here's one we did earlier.
So you'll see it's bubbly, it's vibrant. And the way to know if your sourdough mother culture is ready to bake bread is that it passes the float test. So as I said with baking bread, I'm going to show you a little graph here.
Can you use gluten-free flour? Not really, because it doesn't have the gluten in it with which to rise. Gluten is the scaffold with which to rise your bread. So you can't really bake sourdough with gluten-free bread. Maybe others have found this, but we have a wheat bakery where we do use gluten. So we haven't figured that one
essential.
out.
Not that we haven't figured it out. It's like
It's not.
It's a fundamental part of it. And you know, I guess neither of us are celiacs. We've never been fully drawn, and we need a whole separate baker to have it actually gluten free. So just rather than getting lost in all the questions. So as I said, with baking or with sourdough or fermentation, there's two main secret ingredients, and they're time and temperature. So if it's very warm, approximately 25 degrees Celsius, you're going to have this quick fermentation process. And this line here is optimum level of activity. So anything above this is good. So if it's warm, you're going to have a much steeper curve, and you're going to have a much smaller window between when it's optimally ready. Whereas if you have a much slower fermentation process, you'll see you'll have a much longer period with which it's ready at that optimum level of temperature.
Before it over ferments. Just to recap here, I just want to recap because there's a lot of questions coming in here. So what we did, we're just using a standard jar. You can use a standard jam jar at home. We put equal part flour. Day one, yeah. So day one, we're going to put equal part flour, equal part water. So we put 50 grams of each. We mixed it and we left it sit. I leave that sit for 3 to 5 days until it gets very yeasty. As Stephen said, it'll probably separate.
Yeasty, it smells yeasty, it needs feasty.
Yeah, so I think that's a great
That was very good. I can't remember who said that.
So 3 to 5 days, it is ready. It starts to smell a little bit funky. It will be separated. Then I'm going to mix it all together. And as Stephen said, time and temperature, the two variables. If it's a warm room, it'll probably be ready in 3 days. If it's a cold winter in Ireland, it could take 7 days. You know, time and temperature, the two variables. And then we're going to mix it all together, and we're going to discard half of it just to build a strong, resilient mother. Because the moment it won't be resilient enough, it won't have all the bacteria and the yeast that we need.
And then I'm going to feed it every day for the next 7 days. So the end of 10 days, I'll have a stable, like kind of sourdough that I'm ready to bake bread.
See the way there's nice airs, there's nice bubbles in it. It's kind of like, it's like cream, but it just smells like yeast.
Yeah, and you can eat it, and if you eat it, it's very good for your, microbiome because it's bringing more digestion. So the easiest way to know if your sourdough mother culture is ready to bake bread is what's known as a float test. So I'm just going to take approximately a tablespoon. I'm going to pop it into a glass of water, and if it floats, it's at optimum temperature. So remember this graph that I showed you here? If it floats, it's in this level here, and this is the range with which we want to use our mother or levain. If it goes down here, it's over fermented. So it's going to taste really acidic. It's going to be bubbly, but it's going to sink. If it's over here, it's going to sink and it needs more time to get up to here. So if I'm here, I need to feed it and go back here. If I'm here, I need more time to get it up to here.
Brilliant. I love your graph, and your artwork is excellent. Big shout out to you, Lucy Joseph. Great artwork. But question for you here now. So you mentioned levain and sourdough. That's one thing I want to get into. But so say I've got my mother. It smells good. The starter, wow, looks good. Nice aeration. I do the float test. It's ready. Like, do I feed it in the morning and then you know that it's going to be ready in the afternoon, or to bake my bread, or how do I go from there?
So once you have your mother, you decide how frequently do you want to bake. If you're someone that wants to bake every day, you're going to have to feed it every day. And if you're in summer and it's warm, you may have to feed it twice a day. If you want to bake once a week, keep your mother in the fridge and feed it the day before you want to bake bread. And the bit that you discard or you take off, that's what you're going to use to build your levain, which is a fancy term for the mother culture that you're going to use to bake your bread and eat. Because as I said earlier, you never eat your mother. Your mother, how do you feed it? Add equal part flour and water. So as I mentioned there with this one, it was 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. I'd add in 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. If I want my levain to be bigger, I want 500 grams of levain. I might put in 200 grams of flour, 200 grams of water, and just let it come up that curve again.
Beautiful. Okay, so step one is to make our sourdough mother. And we've got 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. Mix it. Might take 3 days sitting with the lid open with a cloth on top of it just to protect it from insects. We leave it sit for 3 days, maybe 5 days, depending on temperature. After that, we discard half of it. We feed it equal part flour, equal part water. We mix it and we leave that for probably 5 to 7 days. Until then, it's likely to pass the float test.
So many people are watching it, getting lost in the technicality of feeding your sourdough mother. It's very intuitive. And I think the real key thing to learn is this, which seems really technical, but this is your sourdough mother culture.
So maybe take a photo of this if you can.
Yeah. So this is your sourdough mother culture. So when you feed it, it gets active. It's eating the starches or the sugars in the wheat or the flour, and it's creating gases, and the gases are what rise your bread, carbon dioxide and other gases. And as it comes up here, it's really light and fluffy, and it's highly active, and it's eating all the sugars. As it gets down here, it's kind of getting a bit lazy, a bit tired, a bit kind of windy, and down here it's lazy and it's not going to do anything. So what you want with your sourdough mother culture or your levain, you want to get it up around this window.
You want to get it in the prime where it's like it's active, it's ready to go. It's going to raise your bread and turn you into a nice, you know, fluffy loaf of bread. Because you might have known if you've ever baked sourdough at home, you might end up with flat loaves or loaves that don't properly rise, and that's because typically your sourdough mother isn't active enough. That's one of the main, or it's overactive.
So here's one I've proved earlier. This was a 48-hour process, and this is ready to bake. So I just want to show you so that we'll have one. Here's one we did earlier. We will go to how we did that, but I just want to show you. I'm being told to calm down now. I want to have one just to show you that a finished dough. So what we recommend on our sourdough baking course for a home baker to increase your chances of having a perfect loaf every time is to use a Dutch oven. Many people suggest, oh, I'll put a pizza stone, I'll use a Mr. Gun. It may work, but it's inconsistent. A Dutch oven will really increase your chances. They're readily available. They're not that expensive.
They're typically €20 to €40, and you probably can spend a lot more. But I certainly had a look on a number of websites this morning, and they start as low as €20, and an average one will be 40 to 50 euro.
Sometimes they could be €100, but you'd be surprised that your grandmother or your mother or your auntie, someone will have them in the closet and they don't even know it's a Dutch oven and they don't know how to use it. So they are around and they can be cheap.
Is another term for it just a cast iron pan with a lid on it?
Dish. So what I've done, and I'm just going to go through this quickly, I've preheated my oven to 250 degrees Celsius, the hottest temperature, and I've put my Dutch oven in and with the lid on. Now, when you see my Dutch oven, the enamel has come off slightly because seawater used to fall in it, so it's cool. It's been aged. I use it all the time, and I love this Dutch oven.
So don't be alarmed by what he's saying. Don't be alarmed.
So
it's lovingly rusted.
So this is piping hot. So when you go to do this at home, you're going to be slightly panicked unless you've done it loads of time. So in terms of how to load it, I'm going to just leave this here.
Loading, it sounds cool, like loading a gun.
Yeah, let me find my rice flour.
Okay, here we go.
Well, there's just a process in terms of loading it. So one of the main flours that you'll use in terms of loading is to use rice flour. Let me get one of these little lads. You all excited?
I am raring to go.
So I'm just putting a little bit of, this is like my loading board. It just makes it easier because I guess Dutch ovens come in many different types. I'm going to take the lid off now, and I'm just going to pop that onto a level surface.
So it is hot. You could get
my dough here. I'm going to get a razor blade.
So this, as Stephen said, this has been a 48-hour ferment. He did mix the sourdough mother with his base flour, his base recipe. He kneaded it, he let it sit, he kneaded it again. We're going to go through that process, but he just wants to bake this now just to show you an end result.
I just want to find a razor blade. Do you want to answer any questions when I find my razor blades?
Okay, well, I can't really see them right now. But the questions are great. Thank you for all the questions. What size Dutch oven do you recommend? This is probably about a 3-litre one. You can buy them in various different sizes. Something which will do at least a 500-gram loaf.
Okay, so I can't find my razor blade, so I'm just going to show you how you can do it without it. So I have my dough here. This is a banneton basket, which I've proofed it. To know if my dough is ready, I'll just simply press it in and it'll bounce back. It also has a little bevel like this. It's gone from being level to being slightly convex, as in there's air in it. I'm going to pour this out on my rice flour. The reason why I use rice flour is that it's a different protein composition to wheat flour, so it doesn't stick. So I pour that out. I'm going to take a little brush.
So do I need one of these?
It's worth investing in. You don't need it, but it's worth investing.
So a banneton basket, this is obviously, the rusty thing is cool. It does work great.
I've just brushed it there, and I'm going to score it. So this guides the rise. If you don't have a razor blade, simply use a scissors. And traditionally, this was a means of signing your bread. I'm just going to load this into my Dutch oven. In it goes like that. I was really careful. If you can see from the camera above, pop our lid on. Lid goes on, that holds the steam, and this is going to start with oven spring. I'm going to load this into our oven at 250 degrees, and I'm going to leave that to bake for 20 minutes.
So I'll set a timer.
Yeah.
I'll be your timer. Okay. So what's the purpose of the Dutch oven, and why? Like, what is the big set? Like, why should so anyone watching here is going, oh my God, there's a lot. There's a lot in this. But this, as we said, the big the big promise of sourdough is it costs you pennies. It is an act of rebellion. It will feed your immune system. You're good. You will. Your family will love you. You will love yourself. You will be so proud. So this is a sales pitch. But there is a journey. There is a
question
journey.
there from Antonella Merlo. Yes, you do. So when you're making sourdough, there's two processes happening. This one we've already proofed, which means we've already allowed to rise. So when you bake sourdough, there's two things happening. There's over on this side, I'm developing gluten, and over this side, I'm fermenting. So in wheat or in flour, there's two different proteins. There's glutenin and gliadin, and when you mix them with water, they come together and they form this natural gluten, which is elasticity. And this functions like a scaffold to hold your bread up. And as I said, once you mix your levain in, what happens is the yeast and the microbes in the levain, or your mother culture, consume the flour, consume the sugars naturally occurring in the flour, and they give up carbon dioxide and other gases. And these are the natural bubbles that occur in your sourdough that aerate or leaven your bread. So
brilliant.
I'm getting excited.
So he is getting excited. Like
I'm overwhelmed.
He is.
Don't worry, Aisling. It's fun, it's easy, and it's something that you need to do. And as Dave said, we do have a sourdough course that we'd love people to consider signing up. Because it's
a process, and that's why we're doing it over 4 weeks. It's to kind of bring you on this journey, because like with an hour, we're going to do our best to give you as much information and to arm you with the basics. And there is a journey in it. There is it is one of the most rewarding things you can do, but there is the basics which you need to learn and really kind of master.
So Saoirse Rourke had a question: any alternative to a Dutch oven? If you're going to bake consistently, and if you want to bake really good bread like this
is called a free-form loaf.
This is a free-form loaf. It's well worth investing in. So Emma, could you simply demonstrate how to make the dough? Yeah, I'm going to do that now. So we're just going to show you that process now.
And I'm just going to explain two things. There was one there.
Keep it moving.
Okay, keep it going. There's a free-form loaf and there's a tinned loaf.
Leave all that. Let's just make a dough.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to make a dough.
Yeah. So I have my ingredients here. I'm going to do a dough that's 60% hydration, which is a fancy term for the relationship between water and flour. I'm going to make this 80% white flour. I'm using strong flour. Strong refers to that it's got a higher protein content, so it's easier to develop gluten. So if you are going to bake bread and you are going to use wheat-based flour, which most people will use, strong is better because it's easier to develop gluten. It's not necessarily better, but it's just easier for a beginner. So I have 400 grams of a strong white flour. The reason why I'm using white flour is just because it's typically the sugars are more available and people like it. If you make it too healthy, like 100% wholemeal, it'll be really healthy, but it won't taste as tasty. So it's to find that balance between white and wholemeal.
Yeah. So it is that balance between health and taste. Like that's the reality with life. It's like healthy habits versus things that are fun. Like it's finding that sweet spot where there's healthy habits that are fun. That's when things are sustainable.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we got 400 grams of strong white flour here. That's what we're using as our
100 grams of wholemeal flour.
Okay, so 100 grams of wholemeal, 400 grams of strong white.
And 5 grams of salt.
Okay, 5 grams.
Can you grab another bowl there?
What's the ratio of salt?
In here? Yeah. So I'm just going to mix that together. So typically we go with about a 10% or 1% salt ratio. So into another bowl, I have 300 grams of water. And as I said, there's 2 secret ingredients when you go to bake bread. There's time and temperature. So if my water is really warm, and warm meaning like below 30 degrees Celsius, so somewhere between 20 and 28 degrees Celsius, it's going to get off on a much quicker fermentation. If my water is cool, it's going to be on a much slower fermentation. So, there's a famous baker called Chad Robertson who wrote the book Tartine and kind of revived the sourdough movement in California. He had a famous expression that don't work for the bread, let the bread work for you. So the more you can control time and temperature, you can dictate when your bread is ready. So
brilliant.
I have 300 ml of water. I'm going to put in 150 grams of levain or active mother culture. So think of your levain. The amount of levain you put into your sourdough, it's like the amount of builders you put in to build your house. If you have more builders, it's going to happen quicker. If you have less builders, it's going to typically happen slower. So here I've put in a 30% levain because I want this to be ready quicker. So I'm just going to take a spoon.
So are there percentages that I go with there? You went with 400 grams of strong white flour, 100 grams of wholemeal flour. You had 4 grams of salt, was it?
I had 5 grams of salt.
5 grams of salt, and then we have 300 ml of water. Is that right? Are there baseline kind of percentages to work off there?
Yeah, so I'm using what's known as baker's percentage, where typically the main ingredient in bread is your flour, and everything is relating to the flour. So in this loaf, this is a 30% levain. So let's just say I have a kilo of flour. As I said, I'm going to go 60% hydration, so it's 600 ml of water. I'm going to go with a 30% levain, that's 300 grams of levain, and I'm going to go with a 1% salt, so it's going to be 10 grams of salt.
Question, Stephen Flynn. What's the difference? So I've got mother, and we're not to eat our mother. What's a levain? You're using this word levain, and I'm a bit confused and a bit overwhelmed.
Okay, so absolutely. So levain is your mother culture that you're going to use to bake your bread. So for example, I keep my mother culture in my fridge. It lives there all week long. And I know I normally bake bread on a Saturday. So on a Friday night, I go, I'm going to feed my mother culture. I'm going to take half it, discard it out. I'm going to feed it and put my mother culture back in the fridge.
So feed it with equal part flour, equal part water.
Yeah. And the bit that I discard, I'm going to use that to build a levain. So say, for example, I have 100 grams of discard. I'm going to put in 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water, mix it together. I now have 300 grams of levain. And that's going through that graph that I went through earlier. So,
and how long will it typically be till it's optimal?
It depends on the time and temperature.
Okay.
And that's, you got to get to know that. Like, I can't prescribe that because the cultures that you will have and your mother will be slightly different to my ones, and your environment will be warmer or cooler than mine.
Can you give me a guideline though? Is it 2 hours or is it 4 weeks?
No, it's somewhere between 6 to 8 hours. It could be 24 hours if your cultures are very slow and they're kind of tired and they need to get more fit.
Yeah, if they're not fit.
So back to this. So we've 300 ml of water and I have 150 grams of levain. I'm going to just, and it's floating, it's active. I'm just going to disperse that throughout our water, just so it's evenly distributed. And my water is about...
You're doing great now, Steve. You're doing great. Steven's been so excited about this. He really is. And he's so into this that his passion, and he wants to show you all his tricks in 1 hour. But he's aware if he does this, he's going to completely overwhelm you. So you're doing great, Steve. You're some man. You're some man. You're doing brilliant.
Thanks. So we've dispersed our levain through our water. So our now water is levain.
How much levain? We had 300 grams levain.
I had 300 mil or 300 grams of water. And
that was a question. Someone asked the difference between grams and mil. It's the same thing, grams and mil.
So I'm putting in that flour. So that was 400 grams of white flour, 100 grams of whole wheat flour, and 5 grams of salt. And I'm just going to mix that together to develop our dough. So this is 60% hydration. So it's not that wet a dough comparative to other ones. So when you're starting out, hydration refers to how sticky or wet your dough is. Some doughs, like when you slice them, the crumb or the filling of the dough literally sticks to the knife and you could throw it to the wall and it sticks to the wall. That's a really wet dough. Some people love it, some people hate it. So it's with hydration, it's about finding that sweet spot. And the beautiful thing about baking your own sourdough, and the frightening thing for many people who are new to this, is you can customize it to the way you like it. So I have a big scraggly mess.
Can I come in there with one thing? Yeah. The benefit of a wet dough is it lasts a lot longer. Like a wet dough, like a rye dough is typically very wet. And when you make a rye sourdough bread, it can often last for a week and still be wet. It won't go off. Whereas if you make a less wet bread, it might only last 24 hours or 36 hours. And then after that, you're probably going to toast it for the rest of the week.
So I have a bit of a scraggly mess here, and you're going to be going, oh my God, I poured this on my counter. I don't want to make a mess on my counter. Don't worry, it'll all come together. And what I want to do is I want to develop this until it gets all smooth. So you see how scraggly it is and how messy it is. I'm trying to just work this or knead the dough. And what's happening is I'm developing gluten. And that's the elasticity. So if it's really sticky and you're finding it hard to work with, stick with it, or else get a little bit of flour. Can you just get me there's a little bit of flour? Yeah. Just have it beside your work surface and just pop a little on your hand. In a commercial bakery, this would be never done. But when you're at home, you can do it the way you want and make it easy to work with and to knead.
So Steve, now, so you mentioned there was two things which we tried to do with bread. One is develop gluten and one is to fermentation. So at the moment, we're developing gluten by leading, which the gluten is the scaffolding, which enables the carbon dioxide to form bubbles in that lovely aerated sourdough, which you're going to put your delicious avocado on or whatever you like to do with it.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily the gases. Gluten is just the elasticity, or think of it like the scaffold that's going to hold your bread up.
Thanks for all the questions, everyone. You're doing great. And sorry we're not the best at
Temperature of
answering.
water depends on what way you want it. As I said, if you want, just to go back to this.
Yeah,
graph,
there's Lynn. It's the most empowering skill to have. Like baking sourdough really is.
As I said, temperature dictates time. So it's like if you want a much quicker ferment, as in if you want your bread ready in 6 to 8 hours, which means the easiest way to think of it is like the longer you ferment your dough, typically it's like marinating, you know, whatever food it is. The longer you marinate it, the more flavor it has, the more complexity, the more nuance and subtlety and beauty in it. But it's this type of trajectory. You need a lot more patience, and this could be 2 days. Versus if you want one in 8 hours, you got to use warm water, like around 25 degrees Celsius. You got to leave it out to proof in 25 degrees Celsius. And this process might take 8 hours. Versus if I want to go real slow, I'd use cold water. I'd develop gluten. I'd get it kind of started, my bulk ferment, and I'd ferment it in the fridge.
Yeah, even just to give an example, like in our bakery, we bake hundreds of loaves every day. I'll just hold this here. Yeah. We bake hundreds of loaves every day. And just to give us a greater window, if we were to do a 24-hour ferment, there wouldn't be much error for getting it wrong. Whereas we do a 48-hour ferment where we ferment it in the fridge, which is called retarding. It's a French word. For slowing down. And it just gives us a much bigger window with which to come out with perfect bread every time. Like it just gives you, they say that the sign of a good artist or artisan baker in a sense is someone that can hide their mistakes. In this sense, you're giving yourself a much bigger window with which, if you do make a mistake, it's probably going to still end up 90% okay.
So many people are getting caught up with how much levain and how much mother culture to add in. It all depends on what way you want. Oh, there's Claire from the Fat Flux. Hello, the great Claire Cullen. Can you use an electric stand mixer? Of course you can. You know, absolutely. But I think kneading dough is something really beautiful. A friend, Monko McGann, always says that kneading dough is like taking Prozac. It's like...
We're not pharmacists and we're not doctors.
Yeah.
But
this is what he says. But through doing it, it's something that humans have been doing for many, many years. And it's such a beautiful thing. And like, I love it. I absolutely love it. And it's something that if you do take time to learn this skill, it's so empowering and it's so beautiful. I think being able to bake incredibly good bread is a really important life skill.
Yeah, and there's something quite intuitive when you do start kneading. It's something almost in your biology that as you start kneading, you kind of realize, oh, it does need a little more flour. It does, like you're going to knead until it comes together into a really nice...
Until it starts to develop what's known as the window pane effect. So if I stretch this, you see the way now you can see the light without it tearing. That's good to go.
Wow, so you've developed enough gluten now.
Yeah, it's good to go.
So so the ferment bit, like the two bits which we're trying to develop the gluten, you've done that now, and the ferment comes from the sourdough starter.
Yeah, and so the time now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do our first ferment. This is known as bulk fermentation. So I'm going to literally just put this back in the bowl.
So here's a bowl.
Here's a clean bowl. Yeah. Just flour the bowl so it doesn't stick. Just put a little bit of flour in it, not too much.
Just any flour.
Pop it in.
Is this course part of the membership? Yeah, if anyone's a member on our app, you're going to get access to our sourdough baking masterclass series, which is starting next Wednesday, which we'd love you to be part of. It's still on early bird. I'm going to tell you all about it as we go on through it. But it really is. It's, as we were saying, sourdough, it's such an amazing skill. And there is a process to it. And we're going to take people on the process over the next 4 weeks. It's starting next Wednesday. Running for 4 weeks. We're doing 2 masterclasses, 2 workshops, and there is a full course which you can access over the next year. You can use it over the next year, which is 20 lessons and breaks down all the various components and answers all your various little questions.
So just while Dave was talking there, I just took the lid off our Dutch oven. It was 20 minutes. It has risen quite a lot. And I'm just going to now develop crust caramelization.
Crust
You didn't set a
caramelization.
timer, did you?
Oh, I did, yeah, you had 6 more minutes.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, so he's just going to show you how organic and natural the process is.
Yeah, really
happening live. Stephen, you're such a daredevil.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Wow, what a rebel.
I don't need it either. Fold it and stretch it. You can do that absolutely. There's the beautiful thing about making sourdough is that there's many ways to do it, and it all depends on what way works for your life. Like it's like, as I mentioned, you could use 2% levain, you could use 40% levain. It doesn't matter. It's just whatever suits you. Like no one method is better. The best method makes the bread that you like.
Yeah, but there is the basics that you do need to understand. This basic principles, which is like you can see, it's difficult for us to do in an hour because it is quite technical. So, but it is so rewarding. I'm really encouraging you to embark on this journey of being a rebel and spending pennies baking sourdough bread that's good for your good, it's good for your family, and it's just so damn tasty. It really, really is.
Correct.
So what was the last step, and how far in the future are we time traveling to the next step?
Okay.
So you be quiet now. So I'm going to go through bulk fermentation. Stretch and fold is a lovely way of kind of distributing the gases throughout your dough and a way of developing gluten. So there's many ways to do it. So don't really get caught up in it. If you want to do stretch and fold, typically it's for more wet doughs. This is a typically drier dough where you're only using 60% hydration. So you can do, it doesn't really matter. Don't really get caught up in it. So
You're doing great.
Thanks.
You're doing brilliant.
So I'm going to leave this to ferment, and I'm going to leave it, this is called bulk fermentation, and I'm going to leave it for typically until it's doubled in size. As I said, if your room is warm, this could take 6 to 8 hours. If your room is cool or you do it in the fridge, it could take one full day, like 24 hours. So what we're looking for is that it's doubled in size. So I'm going to come back after the end of whatever the time period is, and I'm going to see, the lad said it's doubled in size. So I'm just going to show you one that's doubled in size.
Ah, here's one he did earlier.
So here we are here. Oh, I come back. Oh, and there it is. It's doubled in size. I just put it out on a board because it's easier. I wanted to show you the next step. So it is doubled in size. It's aerated. It's light. It's fluffy. It's easy to touch.
And the aerated shows that you have carbon dioxide has started building in it amongst the gluten. And it's lighter, it's fluffier. You can see it's on the way of forming these bubbles already. What are you looking for?
Dough scraper.
I'll get you dough scraper.
Okay, so dough scraper is a handy little thing to invest. It's just a way of, I guess, handling your dough and making it easier to work with. Oh, Shawnee, there's one over there. Yeah. So this is a dough scraper. There's two main varieties. This is a typically firmer one that's easier to make cuts. I prefer the smaller little plastic one. It's easier just to get in under. I'm just literally gonna, it's sticky, the dough. So what I want to do here is after bulk ferment, I want to shape it and I want to put it into our banneton basket. So banneton basket, it's just a way to get these lovely indents on your dough. It's also known as a proving basket. So proving is a fancy term for meaning allowing your bread to rise. So really simple. So many people, what they do is they kind of dust it with wheat flour and they come back and they allow it to proof perfectly, and they take their piping hot Dutch oven out of the oven and they're ready to load it. It's like it sticks to the surface. So a really simple but way of avoiding that is to simply dust your banneton with a little bit of rice flour. So will you do that? And the reason why we use rice flour is it's got a different protein composition to wheat flour. So I'm trying to get it into the edges there so it won't stick. And I don't want too much, but again, as you saw last time, I can brush bits of it off. So it's just, I'm getting it into the surface like that.
I'll do that, yeah. So we're just getting it into all the rims and all the ridges and just getting it around. And as Stephen said, the rice flour is a different protein to wheat flour, so it means it won't stick and you're going to end up with your delicious sourdough like so.
So just to recap, we mixed our dough, we left it ferment until it doubled in size. That took about anywhere from 8 to 24 hours. And now we've poured it out like this. It's on our little work surface, and I'm going to develop surface tension. I'm going to shape it and pop it in my banneton basket for its final proof. So there's many ways to do this. And there's no one way, like everything with sourdough. And I'm just going to show you how to basic stitch. So I'm going to bring this side over that side, this side over that side. I'm going to do the same there, same
So
there.
it's exactly as you see it. It's nothing more complex. Like it is kind of like playing. It's almost like turning off your thinking mind and just doing like it's stitching it all together.
Yeah, and I'm shaping. Will you just pop a little bit of flour on there?
Of course,
on my board.
So just get your twin to put some flour on your board for you.
Yeah. And
notice
the way I didn't flour inside. I've just floured outside of it because I don't want kind of raw flour going inside my dough now. So I've shaped this like a bâtard would be the French word. So this is for like this type of a loaf. Alternatively, I could shape it into a ball, and that would be called a boule.
Or you could do it into a long French stick or a what do you call it?
Well, a French stick would be a different process. So once I have this ready like this, and I've developed a little bit of surface tension and I'm happy with the shape, I'm going to use my dough scraper. I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to put it seam side facing up. So there's my seam side, and I'm going to leave this for my final proof. Don't worry about it, just leave it. And what I'm looking for here is that it goes from being this slightly beveled dough where it's reasonably fermented. And this is going to take, again, anywhere between 3 hours if your room is warm to anywhere to 12 hours or 24 hours if your room is cold. So as I said, time and temperature are the two secret ingredients. So I leave that for that process. I come back after 12 hours and it looked like that dough that I loaded in my Dutch oven.
which was just it doubled in size again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So just in terms of timing, so I'm a little confused with timing. So, like, what would be the typical timing? Like, if the first one when I do my
there for you just
when I've got my mother, I've got my levain ready, so that could take 6 hours. Then I do my bulk ferment, that could be another 6 to 8 hours, and then I do my second ferment, which could be another 6 to 8 hours.
Yeah.
So it could end up being a 24-hour process that I need to get ready the day before and then have it ready the day after.
So initially it will see, knock the dough back would typically be a term used in commercial yeast baking. This is sourdough, so you don't really want to knock it back. So in yeast baking, or commercial yeast baking, why you knock it back is so you get an even crumb and you kind of break down some of the bigger structures. Whereas in sourdough, you saw the way I handle it there. Just, will you hold that there?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So like this is another one that has also been proved, this dough here, just to recap that process. So it's been through its bulk ferment. I've taken it out after 12 hours. Let's just say my room was approximately 15 degrees Celsius. So it took 12 hours for that bulk ferment to happen, and it doubled in size. So I've just poured it out on a board like this, and you'll see it's light, it's airy, it's taken time to develop all that nice gases inside. And the last thing I want to do is knock it back, squish those air out, because we've worked so hard. So I'm going to shape it, develop surface tension, move those gases around, and also so that any bit of kind of remaining starch it consumes, and it gives a tighter structure, it guides the rise, it gives me a better crumb, a better crust, and just an overall better bread.
Lynn Pill is a good way of doing it. She says last ferment is overnight in the fridge for me, bake in the morning, prep one day, bake in the morning. So that's typically, you'll typically prep the day before and then bake the next day. That's typically how it works. And it sounds like a very complex thing, but it literally takes 5 minutes a couple of times a day, and that's your process. And you end up with, as I said, bread that costs you pennies, is really good for your gut. It's using 3 simple ingredients, and it is an act of rebellion against the industrial food system. Yes!
So just to recap, stitching this dough. So I'm going to hold it out. There's many ways to do it. You don't worry. If I wanted to do a boule, if I had a round banneton basket, I'd do a boule. But here I'm just simply going to do...
Boule meaning bowl.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do what's known as a batard in French baking. So I'm just stitching it over on itself. And what this is helping doing is it's helping redistribute those gases, and it's helping creating surface tension. So I'm rolling it up. And notice I didn't put any raw flour in it because I don't want raw flour in the center of my dough at this stage. And I'm just going to develop a little bit of surface tension.
And once again, I'm going in with a little bit of rice flour just into our little banneton basket. This is, as we said before, rice flour has a slightly different protein content than typical wheat flour, so it'll mean that it won't stick. Your bread won't actually stick when it comes to taking it off and transferring it onto your baking tray.
So if there's too much, just pour a little bit out. We're just going to pop it in there like that. So the seam side is facing up, and I'm just going to leave that to ferment. Our final proof. And as someone suggested there, you could put it in the fridge, leave it overnight, come back. Just make sure that when I press it, it should bounce back comfortably. So there, it's a little bit sticky.
And rough guidelines on time here is about 6 to 8 hours again.
If it's 25 degrees, it will approximately take 6 hours. If your room is, or you put it in the fridge and it's 5 degrees, it will take 12 hours. If it's somewhere in the middle, it'll take somewhere around.
So there is an aspect of developing a system that works for you in your own kitchen, but I guess this is what we want to cover on our Sourdough Baking Masterclass course. We want to help you develop a system so that you are empowered to bake bread for pennies that is good for your gut. It really, really is. So, okay, so Steve, so next, once we've proofed it in our banneton for approximately, say it's about 8 to 10 hours or overnight in the fridge. Next step, we're going to pop it in our Dutch oven and bake it as we did, 20 minutes with the lid on, take it off, and 20 minutes with the lid on.
Just to show you what it looks like. So the first 20 minutes when it's in the oven, what happens is oven spring. So, you know, when we mixed that bread, it was 60% water content. So when I had the lid on, what happens is the yeast and the microbes, they get in that heat and they get really active and they go, oh, party on, and they start to grow. And because the lid is on, it traps any moisture that's evaporated. So it prevents the crust from tightening. So it allows this big, they call it oven spring. So it springs up and it grows. So we allow this happen for 20 minutes. Then after 20 minutes, we take the lid off, reduce the temperature to approximately 180 degrees Celsius. And what we're doing now is we're developing a caramelized crust. So it's going through the Maillard reaction. And this here is the ear of the bread. You can see the gluten structure in there in the middle. And what we're trying to do is we're really trying to caramelize the crust.
It smells amazing. Like this This is the reason you bake sourdough bread. It's that smell in the morning. It's that feeling like bread, baking your own bread. There's something so rewarding, as I said. And yeah, that's what we really want to empower you with.
So can I talk briefly?
Very confused about temperatures. My kitchen is too cool, I think. I've been feeding a starter for over a week now. Going to try rye flour next time. Okay.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the...
What's it? Hot press is a good way, yeah, if you want to really speed it up. Hot press will typically be a lot warmer, so it might be ready in 3 days.
I wouldn't necessarily get caught up in idealizing rye to be the perfect one. It's more about learning that cycle that we've showed a few times. You feed it, once it's warm, it will start getting more active, and you want to get it up here where it's nice and bubbly. Sorry, I'm rubbing it out. But you get the idea.
Yeah.
So time and temperature are the two things that you really need to kind of understand. And although right now, many people might feel overwhelmed and confused, it's a practical process, and it's something that you got to experiment with. And I guess that's the beautiful thing about this course, is that we really want to hold your hand and teach you these bits, because there's lots of little subtle details that will save you time in the end.
Simon had a nice question, Tierney. Do I need to let my mother rest for 5 to 6 days every time I feed it? No. Only every time you use it.
You could bake twice a day with your mother if your room temperature is warm. So say, for example, you live in a warm country, it's 25 degrees Celsius, and I have my mother culture just sitting out there. I'll need to feed it twice, possibly even 3 times a day, just to keep it
That's if you
ready.
live in Italy where it's 35 degrees or whatever. In Ireland, we rarely struggle with these problems,
So, It all depends on how frequently you want to bake bread. As I said, if you want to bake bread every day, feed your mother every day and make sure your room temperature where your mother lives is approximately 15 degrees Celsius. If you want to bake bread once a week, keep it in the fridge. The day before you want to bake it, you'll feed your mother and take the discard out to build a levain with which to bake bread.
Yeah. So your questions are amazing, and thank you for all your questions. And sorry we haven't got to all of them. It's just been, as you can see, it is quite technical. But it is, once you understand the basic framework, it's a bit like anything. When you learn the basic framework, it's easy to riff off and understand and play with and embrace the organic nature of sourdough, because it's using natural yeasts and natural components and natural bacteria in the air to raise your bread. And that's why it's really beneficial for your gut and your immune system.
And this is a basic process which you can season infinitely. If wild garlic is a season, you can put wild garlic, you can put seaweed, you can put miso, you can put anything with it. So what is the temperature? It depends on where you live and what way you exist.
And your bedroom, it depends on your kitchen. Is your kitchen cold or is it warm?
Rather than what is the temperature, what are we looking for to know that's ready?
Yeah. So what are we looking for? So with your mother culture, it should always pass the float test. That indicates that it's an optimum degree of activity to rise your bread. And
you're doing great. You're doing brilliant.
So regardless of temperature.
Yeah, regardless of temperature, the mother
finish line is important.
The finish line with your mother culture is that if you take a glass of water, you take a spoonful of your mother culture, you pop it in water, it should float. And I don't mean float and sink, I mean float. And continue to float for a good few minutes. So you see it there?
That is passing the float test. And then how you know that when you've kneaded your bread, how you know that it's ready to do your bulk ferment, you can see that it has that window pane effect.
That's
developing gluten. So that's number 1 is the ferment is your mother culture, and number 2 is your developing gluten is your window pane effect.
Could you please just go over the difference between levain? So leavening and mother. So it's levain, Levain.
French word for rise.
So your mother, I'll just literally show you the process. So
thanks for your questions and your patience. We really appreciate it. And Stephen, you're doing brilliant. You're doing great. You really are. There's a lot to cover in 1 hour, as you can see. So it really is.
This is my mother culture.
I'm going to get you a drink of water because you need to drink water.
So this is my mother. I live in Ireland. Let's just say I live in a reasonably well insulated house and it's 15 degrees Celsius in my kitchen all year round. And I go, how frequently do I want to bake bread? And I kind of go, those Happy Pear lads said once a week is achievable. Okay, right, I'm going to do that. So I've made my mother. It's really healthy. It looks great.
It does look good.
Beautiful looking mother. So I'm going to put it in the fridge. I fed it, and I'm putting it in the fridge. So it goes into the fridge and it lives there, right? I go about my week's work Monday to Friday, and those Happy Pear lads said I should feed it the day before I want to bake bread. So I go, okay, I'm going to take my mother culture out. It's Friday now. I take my mother culture out. It's cold. It's hibernating. It's cool. It's going to look quite different to this. It's going to look like flat. It might even have separated a little. And they go, okay, so I should take half it out. So I'm going to be quite organic with this. I could weigh it and be really technical, but I'm literally just going to take half it out into a bowl.
That's called the discard, which we're going to build our levain off.
And I'm going to feed it now. So I'm going to go with equal flour and equal part water.
And it can be as much or as little as I want.
So I'm going to get a weighing scales just to be a little bit specific here, because you guys are all wanting to know every little bit. And I'm going to decide, okay, I have approximately 100 grams of mother in there. So I was told to put an equal part flour, equal part water. So I'm going to go with 100 grams of flour. So I've tared my scales. I'm using the same flour as I used the first time. So I'm going to go with 100 grams of strong white flour.
I'll get you another jug of water.
So we're at 84, we're at 80, we're at 96. So let's, you don't have to be too perfect. So we got 100 mil of water, 100 grams of flour. Now I need 100 grams of water. I'm going to tear my scales.
That one I drank out of, so don't.
Okay. So we're going to go with 100 grams or 100 mil of water.
Right, just
yeah, perfect. Yeah, great. So 100, yeah, perfect. So I'm going to give that a nice mix. And that, now I've fed my mother culture. I'm going to put that, do you want to mix that up?
Yeah, I'd love to.
So I'm going to mix that up, put the lid on it, and put it back in the fridge. And that's it, fed for the week. It doesn't need to be fed again. So with my discards, I want to build a levain. So with my discard here, I've approximately, let's just roughly say I have 100 grams. And I know when I'm baking bread tomorrow, I need roughly 300 grams of levain. So I'm going to take my weighing scales out again. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to go with 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water. So get a clean spoon.
So mother gets stored in the fridge, as we said. If we're only baking bread once a week, gets stored back in the fridge.
So this is me now. I have my mother culture in here, and I'm going to build what's known as a levain. So I'm going to add in 100 grams of strong white flour, the same one that I've used, that my mother culture is used to eating. 100 grams of that, on it goes. And I'm going to go with 100 ml of water.
Here's water. That one I drank out of, sorry.
Okay.
And we'll just go with 100 ml of water.
Yeah. So bring it up to 200. A little tiny bit more. There you are. And I'll just mix that together, and that's my levain. So what I want with my levain is I want to allow it, once I've mixed it properly, I'm going to leave this to ferment. It's going to go on that graph. You want to say your cycle again, Dave?
Yeah.
And let's
So it
just
keeps
say,
coming back to this graph. So it is really important.
this is the fundamentals, the basics of fermentation, which we're going through here. So pretty much all fermentation. So I've mixed my levain and I've turned my scales off, and I'm going to leave my levain. I'm going to cover it because I don't want any little creatures. As I said, I live in Ireland. It's 15 degrees Celsius in my kitchen. I'm going to cover it. I'm going to cover with a tea towel.
You don't live in an A-rated house, then?
No, I live in it. It's 15 degrees. I'm going to cover it. So I'm going to leave that to ferment. And because my kitchen is approximately 15 degrees Celsius, it's going to take anywhere from 10 to 12 hours until it passes the float test. So I might come back in 10 hours later and go, oh, I can't wait. Those lads said it's going to be ready. So I get a cup of water. I take it out. I'm going to take a little bit of this and I'm going to drop it in. Oh, it didn't float. Oh no. What do I do? It needs longer to ferment. So the two ways of knowing if your levain or your mother is under fermented or over fermented. If it's under fermented, there will be no bubbles on the top and it will sink. If it's over fermented, there will be bubbles on the top and it will sink. If it's just right, there'll be bubbles on the top and it will float.
Woohoo!
That's the easiest way.
Okay, do you want to get out our loaf, our finished loaf? Because we want to show people a finished loaf. Now,
One last thing.
Yeah.
Levain is a rising agent because it's creating gas that creates bubbles.
yes, the levain is the rising agent. That is what raises the bread. It really, really is. And depending on how much levain you add to your flour and water and salt dictates how quickly it ferments again. You know, you can add in, as Stephen was saying, you could add in 300 grams of levain, or if you wanted to ferment quicker, you could add in 600 grams of levain and less flour, and it'll just ferment quicker, and it will proof quicker. So that's getting a bit more technical, so we won't get into that.
The penny has now dropped. Great. I'm sorry if it comes across really complex, and it isn't. It's a process of getting involved. This is a practical skill. There's no point in you sitting watching this and go, oh, that's great. That was really entertaining. It's like, this is a life skill that's so enriching, and like, it's such a source of joy for me and for you too. And I think it's really, really important. Anyway.
So we're starting a Sourdough Masterclass series. It's a 4-week course. It's starting next Wednesday. That's the 13th of September. It's running for 4 weeks. There's 2 masterclasses like tonight. There's going to be 2 workshops, and there is a full course with 20 lessons, which you can go through over the next year. And it really is all about empowering you to learn this skill, to start from simple. It's got an early bird price.
How much is it?
It's just €79,
Okay.
so early bird price. If you're an annual member on our app, so a full member, you get access to this along with all the other challenges which we're doing. So it really is exciting. And I know tonight might be overwhelming and it might have been exhausting for some people. We've tried to pack in so much in 1 hour because I guess you can see we're so passionate about it. And over the 4 weeks, we're going to break this down into simpler little lessons which are digestible. And together we're going to bake.
Just to share, so this is the bread that we have baked. This bread, going by the process I used there, took us approximately 24 hours. I'm going to leave this in.
That sounds like a lot, but it literally was 5 minutes, 3 times over 24 hours.
So this is the same bread that's just been left in the oven longer, that there's more caramelization and slightly more, some might say burnt, or some might say more flavor in it. I like it golden, but I'm going to give this another 5 minutes because I want to make this just slightly more, a crispier crust.
Crispier, delicious crust. Salt only grows in the bread, never in the mother. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm on fire. Can't wait for the course to start. Yes, we are all about sourdough. We really, really are. And I guess it started with us.
Can I share one last passion?
Can I just share one more thing? I was just going to say that really, it started with us when we started on this journey ourselves as home bakers, where we knew nothing about sourdough. We really didn't. And Stephen went on this journey, and little by little,
about a 6-year journey.
We got so passionate about it that we started a sourdough bakery. And we've had a sourdough bakery for 2 years where we bake hundreds of loaves every day. And it is one of the most rewarding skills that you can learn in the kitchen. And it's so accessible. I know tonight it may have come across complicated. It may across complex, but really there's a couple of nuances. When you get your head around them, you go, oh my God, I know what they're talking about. I can make a mother, a levain. I get it. The discard I turn into the levain.
Sarah Godwin, what was the temperature of the oven for the first 20 minutes? So you'll put your Dutch oven with the lid on at 250 degrees for the first 20 minutes for it to preheat. Once it's preheated, you'll carefully take out your Dutch oven, pop it on a surface that can deal with heat, take the lid off, carefully load in your proofed dough. You'll score it, pop the lid back on and bake it for 20 minutes. That first 20 minutes will oven spring. You'll take the lid off, reduce the temperature to 180 degrees Celsius and bake for a further 20 minutes where caramelization is happening on the crust of the bread. All flour comes from wheat. This is wheat here. There are many varieties, like thousands of varieties of wheat, each with different flavors. And pre-industrial revolution, wheat typically only had a short shelf life of a matter of weeks. But post-industrial revolution, they learned to remove the oil in the germ, which kind of gave it a much longer shelf life. So one of the beautiful things about being able to make your own sourdough is that you can control the flour that goes into it.
I guess there's so much more we can teach you, and we will go into it in the course. Stephen's twitching to try to tell you everything in one go, but we go into this in slower, more detailed, more digestible chunks.
Fan or not fan, it'll work both ways. A fan oven will mean a more even distribution of heat, but both will work fine. So if you do have a fan oven, it is slightly better because you have an even distribution of heat in the oven. An oven with no fan will work fine also.
So final pitch for sourdough, it costs you pennies. It really, really does.
There was another question there. Maina N, and with Dutch oven, the same times. Yeah, so it's all, the whole thing we've gone through is that we've done it in a Dutch oven because it's well worth investing.
On the course, we're going to show you how to make one in a tin, which is the beginner. It's the undergraduate one.
Yeah,
this is where we would have started, where you don't need a Dutch oven. It's easier, it's simple. Tonight we went to all out and we wanted to impress you with some of our tricks. But the tin is really practical and simple. We'll go through that in the course, which we're starting next Wednesday. As we said, there's 2 masterclasses as part of it. There's 2 workshops. There's 20 lessons. You get access to the Happy Pear app for the next year, where there's hundreds of recipes. You're part of the community there. And we'd love to have you as part of it. There's an early bird price of €79. I'll send you an email after this where you can get a link to it. Steve wants to show you something.
Just crumb, so this is called the crumb of your bread. And when I touch this is sticky and it bounced back. That indicates nice hydration. And you see all these air pockets. That's a sign of really nice, big open crumb, good fermentation. This one here, by contrast, is slightly tighter crumb structure. And that meant it could have fermented for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Now he's gone very technical on it, but as you can see, we're extraordinarily passionate about it. We are here to empower you to bake sourdough bread. We adore it. It has changed our lives for the better. It is good for your health. It is good for your family's health. It is such a nourishing skill, which is beneficial for your mental health. Your family will love you for it. They really, really will. And as will your partners and your friends. So
someone asking there, can we get an example of the timings? Absolutely. just a quick overview, like if someone does want to learn it specific, join the course. It's really easy. We go through it specific. You'll really get it. But just as a general rule of thumb, your levain passed the flow test. You mix your dough, bulk fermentation like this. If your room temperature is 20 degrees Celsius, this will take approximately 8 hours for it to be ready to shape it. Then you will shape your dough, pop it in your stitch it, pop it in your banneton basket, which
or your tin.
Pop it in your banneton basket, which you've lined with rice flour, and you're going to leave that final proof again at about 20 degrees Celsius for approximately 8 to 10 hours. Now it's ready to load in your preheated Dutch oven at 250 degrees with the lid on. Bake for 20 minutes. Take the lid off, reduce to 180 degrees, and you're going to bake it for a final 20 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Stephen Flynn. Yay! Genuinely, there is so much in that, and he's done tons of prep this week because he believes in sourdough bread so much. It's changed our lives. It really has. It's such a rewarding skill, and we'd love you to join us on this journey. We genuinely
even
would.
That metaphor, if you do break bread with someone, you feel closer. And I think when you break sourdough bread, you feel even closer again because it's more nourishing, more rich. And when you do make it yourself, you have the opportunity to imbue more love into your bread.
Yeah, and it's so specific to your environment. And as Stephen said, like there is some other cultures which are 150 years old or 200 years old.
Kazi B asked, what is the book in the fridge? It's one of our books was translated into French this week, and it's called really brilliant book. So
yeah, beautiful book. So as we said, our sourdough baking masterclass series, we'll send you an email with a link to it. We'd love you to consider joining it. 4-week course. It's on an early bird special of just €79. Join us. You will not regret it. Lucy's put the link in here. And I'll send you an email with it. And thanks so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time. We value it greatly.
Mila Blake, big shout out to the great Sean Cahill, who's done all the cameras, and to Lucy, who helped put it all together. So
and well done to Steve. Steve put so much time into this, and he wanted to give you everything in 1 hour, and that's why it might have come across as too much, because he really believes in this so much. So thank you. We're so grateful, and we'd love you to consider signing up and joining us on this course.
Where do people find details?
They find details. Lucy's going to put a link to it here, and you'll find. I'm going to send you an email. If you signed up for, you get an email with.
Can we watch this again?
Yeah, you can watch it again. I'll email the link tomorrow with it. Yeah. So
how long is the course each week? Yeah, it can be done at your own pace, but the good thing is that each week there'll be a masterclass or a workshop where we'll go through, we'll answer your questions, we'll talk you through various different flours and processes.
And it's live, so you can watch it back if you can't make it.
And you're part of a community.
Yeah, the big thing here is you're part of a community that's learning together, because the reality is that a lot of people will say, oh, I'll learn sourdough when I'm retired, or I'll learn it when I've made loads of money, and then I can learn all these things. But this is starting next Wednesday. We'd love you to be part of it. It's 4 weeks. You're going to learn together with a load of different people. You're really going to get into it. There's so much sharing, and it's a bit like a sourdough mother culture. We will form a culture together where together we will go from being novice bakers to being competent bakers in 4 weeks, and that's our promise to you.
And we'll go through how to bake, like as we said, this is 50% white, 50% wholemeal flour. We're going to go through how to make really healthy breads that are like 100% wholemeal. So
there we go. That's the promise.
If we are annual memberships, where do
so we've got an app. It's called the Happy Pear, and we've got an annual membership, which means people get access to all our challenges, all our courses for the next year. You know, we've got a plant-based cooking challenge happening in September, as well as their sourdough one. In October, we're doing a happy sleep challenge with a sleep doctor. November, we're doing a gut course. December, we've got a vegan Christmas masterclass series. January, we're doing happy shape and alcohol free. So we have these consistent things happening where there's live events, where we're getting people involved. And so if you're an annual member, you get access to all of them, or you can just buy, Steve wants to show you his bread.
Just be careful.
Or you can just buy the individual course, which is early bird, which is $79.
That's really hot.
And annual membership is $150. So there's Stephen's loaf, beautiful loaf. It is very hot. My fingers are quite good with heat due to working in kitchens for a long time.
And a really important thing is obviously be careful that Dutch ovens are really hot when they come out of the oven. But if everyone listens quietly, maybe I'll get a little...
this is it. You're going to have to get your mic right close to this.
Okay, yeah, listen to this for lovely. I'm afraid like it's still, the moisture is still in it. That's one of the hardest parts of sourdough breaking, is waiting until it actually cools. Because if you don't, it's going to be slightly gummy. So,
sorry. Okay, anyway, we get the idea. Right,
it's beautiful.
We're going to wrap up. Will you put us on the account? We're going to wrap up by just saying thanks a million. We value your time so much.
If you do want to learn more, we do have our sourdough bread baking class starting. It starts September 13th at €79. We love this. We want to take you in a journey. We want to teach you how to bake great sourdough at home. And we think it's an investment well worth making.
Yeah. Thanks a million. Thanks for joining us. Sending loads and loads of love.
Sending loads of bread.
Woo! 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 Bye.